Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Mid Suffolk District Council Cabinet meeting. Apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Councillor Jessica Fleming.
Thank you. Item 2, declaration of interest by councillors. Item 3, MCA 19/30 to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of November. I'd only got one comment, which is on the, I think it's page 5. Item 59, future leisure management options. That says January 2020. I believe that's now coming in February 2020. Is everybody happy that I sign? Thank you. Item 4, to receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received.
Item 5, questions by councillors.
None received.
Item 6, matters referred by the Overview and Scrutiny or the Joint Audit and Standards Committee.
There were none.
Item 7, the forthcoming decisions list. We're not going to go through it. It's on the website if anybody wants to have a look at it. Item 8, MCA 19/31, the 3-year funding for Mid Suffolk Citizens Advice. Councillor Flack.
Thank you, Chair. It is with pleasure that I present this report to Cabinet. As fellow councillors will be aware, Citizens Advice provide a vital lifeline for some of our most vulnerable residents. Our council is the most significant single funder for Mid Suffolk Citizens Advice, and as Cabinet member I have been in discussion with officers for some time regarding the security of their funding. While we have just commenced a community grants review, I have been keen to bring this item in advance of the outcomes from that review because I recognise the importance of a more secure funding platform for the Citizens Advice, and it is on that basis that I present this paper to you. The paper speaks for itself and I don't intend to spend a long time introducing it, so on that basis I would like to present this report to you and propose the recommendations contained in paragraphs 3.1 and 3.2 to provide a 3-year funding agreement to Mid Suffolk Citizens Advice. Thank you, and I'd ask for a seconder.
As somebody who's previously used some of my locality budget to fund the Citizens Advice, I really welcome this support for them and I'm very happy to second it. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Field.
Thank you. I'm not so sure it was a question. I wanted to express our total support for what you're trying to do. I think excellent. And perhaps a brief explanation. There is some comment in here about a joint scrutiny activity across the whole of the county. I have to say I've been somewhat opposed to getting the county council involved in that as vice chair of the scrutiny committee. The real reason being that we thrashed it to death in November last year when we looked at the proposed county budget and got precisely nowhere is an exaggeration. We did manage to get half the reduction in funding rescinded for a period, so it was going to be a stage funding, and I do notice that the county budget this year does include some reinstatement of funding short term, only something like 110,000, so less than half what used to be provided, but it is an improvement. I would hope to bring that up at our scrutiny of the county budget, which is tomorrow. So I think just really express support and the thought that the CAB, certainly the data they gave us last year, showed a lot of clarity of thought, a lot of understanding of what they're doing, of who they're targeting, I thought was quite exemplary in expressing the activities of an organisation we all know is extremely valuable. So there you are. Sorry, it's not a question, but I hope that's acceptable.
Yes, the whole idea of getting everybody involved in that larger scrutiny was to hopefully force the hand of some people to give us a bit more money. But I think some of our partners have agreed to work with us, and we welcome the county joining in and seeing what they can do for us this year with their budget. Thank you.
If we're allowed more than just questions, can I fully support this? But can I just make a comment in response to what Councillor Flatman has just said, and that is the main purpose of this cross-county task force was not necessarily to force anybody's hand, but to raise the profile of Citizens Advice, because the people who use it desperately need it, but the majority of the population just think that it will go on forever, and we needed to make it clear to the residents of Mid Suffolk and beyond that this is a charity and it needs funding. But I do fully support this, and I would hope that it will be a rolling 3 years, that we're not going to now wait for 3 years before we make another decision, because they do need the certainty of funding.
Yes, totally, Keith. But also, I think we have got to be realistic, and with us agreeing to fund for 3 years, then we are hoping that they might be able to attract other funding as well, that we are not just the only people who are going to fund.
Okay, we've had a proposer and a seconder. Can I have a show of hands in support, please? Anyone against? Oh. Motion is carried. Thank you. Item 9, MCA 19/32, introduction of a Council Tax Penalties Policy. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm pleased to introduce Cabinet Paper MCA 1932 on the introduction of a Council Tax Penalties Policy, which starts on page 39 of our electronic pack. Now, local authorities are tasked with collection of council tax. They're legally entitled to obtain information from residents, owners and managing agents to help identify the person liable for the payment of council tax. The Shared Revenues Partnership, SRP, carries out this function on behalf of Mid Suffolk, Baber and Ipswich Borough Council. Now, civil penalties can be issued where a person fails to supply within 21 days certain information requested by the council, or if within 21 days of a change which affects council tax registration or entitlement to discount, exemption or council tax reduction. In our report, paragraph 4.4 sets out the circumstances in which the council may impose a penalty. Now, currently, none of the SRP partners issue penalties, but all three are now set to bring forward such a policy to their respective cabinets for approval. When I became a member of the Shared Revenues Partnership Committee several years ago, I was happy to learn that the SRP had undertaken a review of single resident discounts, as intuitively it seemed to me this to be an area most open to deception and fraud. Each year, the SRP Committee have been given metrics showing the number of discounts removed by this exercise and the resulting increase in council tax collected. And each year we've agreed to continue this exercise, which is funded by the SRP partners, Suffolk County Council and the Suffolk Police and Crime Commissioner. To me, it's a no-brainer, and I'm pleased that there is a general consensus on this matter by the aforementioned bodies. But the introduction of a council tax Penalties Policy should further encourage customers to keep taxpayers' details up to date, thus ensuring the tax base is as accurate as possible and that more council tax is collected. The policy itself is set out on pages 45 to 48, and I believe that it's a measured and reasonable approach, and it's set out in plain English, and accordingly I'm happy to propose a recommendation for its implementation by Mid Suffolk. That recommendation is set out in paragraph 3.1 on page 39. I will be asking for someone to second that recommendation, but for now I'd also like to introduce Andrew Wilcock, who's with us. He's the SRP Operations Manager, and he's here to assist me in answering any questions that members may have on the policy and the procedures. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder?
I'd like to second the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gord. Does anybody have any questions, either for John or for Andrew? Okay.
Sorry, Councillor.
Sorry, Councillor Field.
Sorry, I was waiting to see if there were other questions first. Just really the whole issue, I suppose, that would concern me a bit about this policy. I understand the sort of driver, but the issue that you know, when you're trying to get the donkey to move, you need a carrot and a stick, and this seems to be a bit of an application of the punishment, the stick. And I'm slightly concerned there. They're fairly happy that that is applied to people who are in the sort of won't pay category for council tax or information about council tax, but somewhat concerned that it may cause problems with the people who are in the can't pay category. So additional penalties will not help people who really don't know where the next penny is coming from. So I really was just going to ask the portfolio how he's going to address that. I can see there's Citizen Advice bureaus involved, and that seems good, but how can we be sure that we are actually encouraging those who are in the won't pay category or won't give information category to change their behaviour, but not punishing people who are in dreadful problems to start off with? Thank you.
I think that, well, within that policy you'll see how much discretion is given to our operations manager in terms of imposing these penalties, and so, you know, it says each case will be looked at on a case-by-case basis. I think we do need the carrot and stick. I mean, I looked at the definition of fraud, because this is obviously an anti-fraud policy, so it's important. What does fraud mean? Fraud is defined as wrongful or criminal deception intended to result in financial gain. And fraud is also defined as deceit, trickery, and an intentional perversion of the truth. So, from that point of view, I think we do need the stick, but at the same time, we've got the discretion within the policy as to how it's applied.
Any more questions? Councillor Field, yes?
Sorry, I wonder if we have any idea how many of these people are in the sort of deliberate fraud category. I don't think the paper gives us an idea of how many people even are in arrears, but how many of those are in a position where they're fraudulently trying to gain an advantage, and how many are in a position where they're totally just unable to pay.
Could I perhaps just ask to bring Andrew in here, because I say over the last few years we've been looking at this single discount, and I know he's done a lot of work on that. Perhaps you just give a bit of a background to that.
Yep, thank you, Chair. I think the first thing to recognise, council tax records, the majority of people, we have a name and we have an address. So until we get some sort of engagement, we don't understand what people's circumstances are. If you purely look on the single person discount, each year we're taking away around 250 cases where they have failed to inform us they're no longer entitled. They haven't been investigated for fraud, so they haven't been classified as fraud. They're purely people that have failed to tell us they're no longer entitled. In terms of fraudulent activity, I haven't got a handle of those figures, but you know, we are focusing on the single person discount things at this point in time. So it is around about 250 cases a year.
So we have a proposer and a seconder. Can I have a show of hands in favour? Does that include you, David? Passed unanimously.
Okay. Thank you again, Madam Chairman. So I'm now pleased to introduce Cabinet Paper MCA 1933 on the adoption of the Council Tax Citizens Advice Collection Protocol. And this starts on page 49 of our electronic pack. In the report, we read that the level of council tax outstanding in England at the end of the last financial year was 3.2 billion, and that's a 7% increase from the prior year. And charities are warning that council tax arrears now rival credit card debts as their biggest concern. It's obviously important that we protect the public purse and maximise our collection, but SRP has been engaging with Citizens Advice to review the processes in place for collection and benchmarking these against the standards set out in the Citizens Advice Protocol. If collection processes can be improved and more early interventions to assist residents struggling with their council tax payments, then we should be able to help prevent further charges being applied. We should reduce collection costs and obviously alleviate stress on those involved. And adopting this Citizens Advice Council Tax Protocol should help achieve this. The protocol itself is set out in our papers on pages 53 to 60. I'm pleased to propose a recommendation set out in paragraph 3.1 on page 49 that Mid Suffolk approves the adoption of the Citizens Advice Council Tax Protocol. Just note that it needs an S after the word citizen, because it's Citizens Advice. The protocol that's detailed in Appendix A, and would look to someone to second that recommendation. Thank you.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Brewster.
Happy to second this recommendation, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Field?
Third time lucky, perhaps. A similar comment to before, and obviously a good protocol to adopt. One's concern, I suppose, lies in the suggestions that it's universal credit that is driving a dramatic increase in council tax backlogs at the present time. I just wondered whether you could refresh my memory on what actions Mid Suffolk takes to ensure that we help people out of their problems in that area rather than push them back into them.
Councillor Whitehead?
Ask Andrew just to put a bit of meat on those bones.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of customers in receipt of universal credit, they're also entitled to council tax reduction, which if they get full entitlement and working age, they receive a reduction of 95%. We then obviously take whatever's left due to be paid, spread that over the whole of the financial year. If people are struggling, again, we will engage and redistribute those payments. What we have found over the last 12 months is customers claim universal credit but fail to claim council tax reduction. So again, we're looking to make some slight tweaks to next year's scheme. So as long as the Department of Work and Pensions inform us they're on universal credit, we'll grant the council tax reduction. But as long as we get that engagement, we do have lots of different arrangement types in place. And again, we also work with Citizens Advice and have quarterly meetings. So if they've got customers that are happy to engage with them, but perhaps not with us, then we will work with sort of CAB directly. So,
Does anybody else have any questions? I have a proposer and a seconder. May I have a show of hands in favour, please? Thank you. Passed unanimously. Item 11, MCA 19/34, is the SIL Expenditure Business Plan, January 2020. Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, this report seeks to obtain the approval of Cabinet for Mid Suffolk SIL Business Plan, January 2020. Now, this business plan focuses on one single bid, being M14-18. The SIL business plan does, however, provide an up-to-date progress position on all those SIL bids which have previously been approved in bid rounds 1, 2 and 3. Now, SIL bid M14-18 was originally submitted in bid round 1 and was for a school expansion for £1.2 million. No planning permission had been granted for any detailed design, and the amount of the bid was based on old cost multipliers. The bid was termed to be invalid at that time. Following a lot of detailed discussion, a revised SIL bid, accompanied by a business plan with a detailed design, was submitted on the 10th of October 2019. This information has been followed up with further information relating to costings, and this information made the SIL bid valid and capable of being progressed. The use of new cost multipliers and the final design for the expansion of Starpland High School means that the project to expand the school with an additional 125 secondary school places and 15 new sixth form places will result in a total project cost of nearly £3 million, excluding VAT, which SCC can recover, and a SIL bid of almost £2.5 million. The reason why this bid is being determined independently of the other outstanding bids is that the housing growth that has caused the need for the school expansion has already taken place in a number of the locations within the catchment area. These developments have triggered the need for school expansion and for this to be fully constructed and capable of being used, ready for the September term in 2020. This is the first high school expansion project and is classed as essential infrastructure in the Joint Infrastructure Delivery Plan. Planning permission was granted for the scheme, which is the subject of this SIL bid, by a favourable decision at Suffolk County Council's Development and Regulation Committee on the 29th of October 2019. We do have Christine here, thank goodness, because it's quite a technical paper, and she is far better situated for answering any questions you might have than I am. But before we start that, I would like to propose a recommendation, and I look for a seconder. Thank you.
Have a seconder?
I'm happy to second that recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Brewster.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, if Christine could possibly answer these ones, and it's just some queries and some clarification I really am looking for. At a previous meeting, I did say when Stillmarket was listed, I'm talking about 4.3 at the moment, on page 65. I did ask if Stowmarket, which had been missed off that list, was within the catchment area of Stow Upland High School. And I would extend that question a little bit because it has been included in this list of bullet points under 4.3. I'm just now wondering if, in fact, it is Cedars Park development, which is part of the catchment area for Stow Upland High School. I don't know if you'd like me to... I've got several questions here, actually, so whether... Sorry, see you now, Christine. I don't know if you'd rather answer these as we go through, or... Yes. Yep. Sorry.
Sorry. Pressing the wrong button. Sorry about that. I looked at this again this morning and thought it was a bit odd that Stowmarket was in the catchment area, but I think you're right in so far as the big Cedars Park development. There is a boundary on that park somewhere between Stowmarket and Stow Upland, and certain parts of that big development do actually point towards Stow Upland and are within that catchment area. So I haven't got, in effect, an exact answer for you in relation to why we plucked out Stowmarket there. It may well be that there are one or two pieces of development in Stowmarket which do actually point towards that as a catchment. Sorry. Yeah, Cedars Park.
Thank you very much. Just moving on. Obviously, there is a lot of quite a substantial sum of money coming from the Cedars Park area to Stow Upland High School, which I don't actually have an objection with at all. But is this money all the percentage of money put into the strategic pot originally? It just seemed a bit large on that side of it. I'm talking about the overall strategic pot as well.
Yes, so in terms of within the SIL business plan, you'll see the recommendation is to spend everything in the strategic pot, which is 1.1 million. That's because a high school, as you can see from your papers, and 4.3 in your cabinet papers, does cover a wide catchment. And when we were putting money into a strategic pot, we always said that that money would be for more than one parish. So for the bigger issues, which or bigger projects, which this is. What we've done is we've looked at all the ring-fenced money, so members may recall that when we take money, we save all the liability notice values, so where we've got developments of over 10 dwellings, we save all that money and we put that into an account against that parish so that when we need the infrastructure for that parish, we can use that money to provide the infrastructure. So for the Stow Upland catchment, there is some, I think, of 953,000 approximately. So we've taken all that money, all the strategic money, and then a proportion of the local infrastructure fund to be able to afford it. And what that does, it gives you, let me just see, looking at my papers, you would have 1.3 million left to deal with bid round 4, the remainder of outstanding bids, and I think you've got approximately 1.5 left in the ring-fenced fund. So this doesn't exhaust all the SIL monies. And sorry if I can reassure people, obviously we take money every day, so we are saving money every day towards replenishing that strategic pot, so it won't remain at naught. And what we do is twice a year, when we do the neighbourhood SIL payouts, that's when we adjust all the pot sizes. So that we make sure that we have everything accurately recorded.
Okay, thank you very much. Really, part of that question was just asking is there a need, once SIL money has gone into the strategic pot, to show actually where it comes from, which SIL area it comes from, or development area?
Sorry, when we made the decision to save our monies into a strategic pot and to in a local pot, it would be very, very complicated, in fact, near impossible to try and find out where all of those monies have come from. You know, we focused our attention really on making sure that for every 10 dwellings and above, we make sure that we capture that money and put it against a particular parish. So to record all of our monies like that, I'd need a few more people, and you know, I'm not sure what benefits there would be. That money that is saved into the strategic pot comes from the whole of the district.
I do see there could be some complications there in doing that. On page 75, under 9.7, it's just a typo actually that bid round 5 opens in May 2029, which I think is probably a little incorrect.
You're correct, sorry.
Any more questions? Councillor Field.
Thank you. Just three, I think. One, I wondered, I understood that the County Council no longer has a concept of catchment areas for schools. The pupil allocation is just to a person's closest school. I wondered how that impacts our sums. The second one, I suppose, is looking at the table of SIL. There's cases with large developments where SIL is collected in a phased manner, but it may well be that something like a school development needs to be carried out in advance. You can't build a class for 3.5 pupils or something. You have to build them in certain modules. I just wondered, is there a process then for the county to bid for the sum of money to build an entire school, and it to be assured that it will eventually receive an appropriate amount of SIL so that it can borrow short term to build the school and then regain the cash from the SIL? So there's a sort of just something on the complexity there. The third one was I noticed the parish council, I think it was, or Stow-Upland Council was concerned about the thought that this particular school is owned by a private company, and therefore this represents, if you like, a £3 million government gift to a private company who I guess could cease operations next week if things were really bad. So I just wondered what the thought was on that. I didn't see an answer to that question from Stow-Upland.
I think that's one for you, Christine.
Let me start with some of the answers to that question, and then perhaps I can introduce you to Joanna Fellows, who's from the Schools Infrastructure team from Suffolk County Council, and I'll take you so far, and Joanna will finish. So you mentioned about the 3 million and about academies. So the DFE guidance actually talks about developer contributions being secured, whether they be academies or not. Academies don't get government funding, and developer contributions are necessary in order to provide infrastructure, whether it has an academy status. So all the academies that we have within the district, it would be intended that if extensions were to be provided, then that money, as long as they're extensions to schools rather than new schools, then that money would come from SIL. On the question of forward funding, I mean, a lot of work happens before a SIL bid is actually submitted. We've been meeting regularly with Suffolk County Council Schools Infrastructure team for a long period now. We do actually look at what is needed for the growth, but also what would future-proof it and what would be affordable. And from that, we get to a situation where in this particular bid, we've got 14 of the amount of places that are being provided, which is being provided according to basic need. So it's not all coming from developer contributions. And on the catchment areas side?
Yeah. Hi. So just on the catchment areas, there is no catchment guarantee anymore, but when it comes to developers and planning the infrastructure, we still use the catchment areas and where the general population is, particularly for high schools, as it covers a large area, to look at where those developments sit and then therefore where the infrastructure needs to go to accommodate those pupils. Obviously there is people preference might take children elsewhere, but generally the infrastructure will be provided within the area that the development is and for the nearest school for that. So obviously for the high school it covers a wide area. For primary schools it's much more concentrated towards, they have smaller catchment areas, but we still use the catchment areas when we're looking for developer contributions.
Thank you. Could I come back on that? It's difficult because I'm getting stories of certainly a high school in my county division that's having pupils directed to it from closest pupils who are in the theoretical catchment area of other schools. So there does seem to be an issue there that how can a particular school gain the funds it needs to expand if you're doing those calculations or you're doing the availability of money calculations based on catchment areas that don't actually function when it comes to direction of pupils.
I think it's almost a catch-22, isn't it? You've got to provide the infrastructure within the catchment areas for the school to be able to offer enough places for the children arising from the catchment area. So if we don't provide the infrastructure at this school, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it, that those children then can't go to the school. So we need to provide the places for the pupils that the pupil yield that we can show is coming from the developments within the catchment area. I don't know if that helps or not.
Councillor Whelan.
Thank you, Chair. I've got several points, some to follow up on what's already been said. I can confirm that students from all over Stowmarket come to Stow Upland High School. Many of them live nearer to Stowmarket High School than to Stow Upland, but that's parental choice. Also, there are quite a number of pupils from Stow Upland who come up to Ipswich to Suffolk 1. Pupil choice. Can I also say it was not the parish council who had concerns about the academy status? That was something that County Councillor Gary Green had a beef about, and I didn't understand it. The parish council didn't understand it, but he certainly had a bee in his bonnet about the academy status. And I don't want to be associated with that, and nor does the parish council. Can I start by saying I fully support the principle of having a high quality, sustainable sixth form at Stow Upland. It is important. And that is included in the Stow Upland Neighbourhood Plan. And I note that you're being asked to approve the bid subject to completion of a community user agreement. And these discussions around the community user agreement need to be widened, in my view, because there are a lot of issues, such as parking issues. I mean, it's a small point perhaps, but the new car park planning permission is for daytime use, and yet we see in here that that doesn't sit well with the suggestion that the University of Suffolk will run evening classes there. So there are things like that that need to be sorted out. There is no parking provision for sixth formers. And yet some 30% of sixth formers in a survey last summer term come to school by car, but by their own car, they drive. 30%. If this grows to say 200 sixth formers, as is the long-term plan, that's 70 cars that need to be accommodated. Unfortunately, at the first attempt to get planning permission, Suffolk County Council was saying that they could use the Village Hall car park, but the Village Hall trustees have said no, that's not permitted. I mean, they need all the spaces there for village hall users who have paid to hire the village hall. Yeah, I mean, in the where is it, on page 64, it says that there is car parking space for sixth formers, but there is none shown on the drawing. That does need to be sorted. The other thing is that there are concerns that there are other phases of development. We know that there are other phases of development because the parish council have been told that, but there's no indication of what they are. This block will have 4 classrooms. If there really are going to be 200 sixth formers, it's going to be fairly big class sizes. I mean, nothing of what I said wants to hold up the agreement to the bid, but I think we need to add on that the discussions need to be widened. It's not just who can use which room on which days and for how long and how much it's going to cost. It's got to be much wider than that. So my question is, how can the District Council ensure that the concerns of local residents and the Parish Council can be addressed before the extension is brought into use? And I have to say the work has already started on site. So, you know, we are on a tight time scale here, but we do need to have discussions about these outstanding issues.
Thank you. As Councillor Wellham may know, there has been a meeting called for the 14th of January with the Academy, with the parish, with yourself, and with the school's infrastructure team, not only to look at the prospect of a further leisure project on the site, but I'm hoping to use that as an opportunity to talk about the community user agreement. Clearly that does need to be a matter which is not just restricted to the town, you know, to the District Council or to Suffolk County Council, but it does need to be a wider debate to make sure that we get the community use of the building secured. And you know, issues that you've mentioned about the amount of occupation on the site of sixth form, you've mentioned 30%. I think I put in my papers 6%. I think that's because it's an ever-evolving number. As more students pass their tests during the year, the number grows, and then a year leaves, and then it starts again. But that is something that the school's infrastructure team are very cognizant of. And it may well be that as part and parcel of talking about, you know, this project in a wider sense next week, but also the forthcoming leisure project, that we touch on that base as well. And as you know, there are other ambitions to talk about footpath improvements as well as access improvements if required.
Jeff, I can just make a comment. Yes, that's good. That's all good stuff. I think one of the things that hopefully we've all learned from this bid is that the community needs to be involved much earlier. As I've spoken to Christine about the aspirations of the parish council to have a trim trail and various other things on the school site, this could all have been put together and thought about at the same time, but unfortunately it wasn't. So I think in future we need to make sure that if there's a big SIL bid coming through, that there needs to be a wide debate locally about what can be gained from that, not just one specific item, but the wider issues need to be agreed in the run-up to the SIL bid being made.
Can I just come back on that? So, as you'll be aware, or you may be aware, we've done quite a lot of work over September, October and November with the joint member panel for amendments to the SIL expenditure framework. And one of the main planks of that was to try and achieve exactly what you said this morning, which is you know, a broad discussion at a very early stage with key people who need to be in the room so that we can capture all the localised issues and then bring them forward at the same time as developing the project. So hopefully when SIL bids come forward in future, it would have been a comprehensive look at the whole process. It's not to say that consultation didn't occur in respect of this project, but you know, from our conversations which had been outside this room, I understand where you're coming from, and hopefully the meeting on the 14th of January is a step forward in that direction.
Councillor Menson.
Thank you. I just want to pick up a couple of points that were raised by my neighbour, Councillor Field. There clearly is confusion about the concept of catchment areas, because even in your response, you talked about nearest schools. Now, parts of my ward, the nearest school is Stow Upland, and that's where they get a free bus to. So there is a bit of confusion about what is the catchment and what is just the nearest school. And in response to the query about funding a private company who run an academy, it may well be that that is government policy, that money comes from public purse to go to private companies, but are there any guarantees or insurances that for the unlikely, I'm not saying it's likely to happen, but a school that gets large amounts of funding from a SIL bid, from the public money, if they just decided to close, sell up, they would get a vast profit. So is there any comeback on that?
Hi. So it's still the reason that trusts don't themselves get funding direct from government for providing school places. They get funding for their condition and for their revenue costs, but it still remains Suffolk's responsibility to provide the school places. So that's why it sits with us, and that's why we're submitting the bid. The building, I guess, remains an education establishment, and if for any reason that trust was found not to be suitable, then the Regional Schools Commissioner would then step in and ensure that those places were provided by another trust. It wouldn't be that they could just sell up the buildings and be gone. That the Regional Schools Commissioner would then at that point step in and ensure that there was a continuation of those places being provided.
I wasn't really talking about the places, I was talking about the vast amount of money that we're giving them, that if they effectively they are increasing the value of their property. If it's owned by an academy trust, their property will now be more valuable than it was before at the expense of the public purse. If they were to sell the building, whatever they're selling it to, another academy, they could make vast amounts of profit out of public purse.
They remain a charity, so I don't know how it would work. It's not been something that we've come across certainly in Suffolk or that I know of nationally. But one would think that as they are a charity, that wouldn't be permitted by the Charities Commission. I would have thought, but I'm no expert on academies and what would happen in that instance.
I'll try and assist. I'm not an expert on charities law or an expert on academies, but I know a little bit about both. So essentially, as a charity, that money is ring-fenced and they don't have shareholders. So the money doesn't go anywhere in the event that they were to go bankrupt. Obviously, if they went bankrupt, the money goes to pay off their debtors. But essentially, any supplementary monies left over at the end are ring-fenced and still charitable funds. They can't be lost into the ether anywhere, and certainly not into somebody's pockets. The expectation is that they're ploughed back into further charitable activity.
Thank you, Arthur. Councillor Brewster, did you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, just another couple of questions, really. Not relating to Stow Upland at all, I have to say. Well, one isn't. On the grant of planning approval, the ring-fence monies for that, virtually every application appears to get an application for library funding. And I think I've spoken about this before, but adding this sum up, in fact, I've missed another 10,000 by the looks of it. I counted what I'd highlighted actually at 192,672, and I suspect now that's it's over the 200,000 with that extra 10%. 10,000 rather. just wondering, it seems a lot of expenditure on libraries, especially given the situation with libraries at the moment, where many are volunteers, I understand. Obviously, they've got the county have got buildings to maintain, which obviously probably contributes to some of that. But I just wonder what sort of area we have control in that expenditure, please.
Okay, so when planning applications come in, consultations happen within this case Suffolk County Council. They give an indication of what infrastructure needs they need to be taken care of as far as the planning application is concerned, and they may indicate that they need a contribution for libraries provision. That then is considered as part of the planning application process. In terms of delivery, and moving on from that, we regularly meet each month with people like Joe and other people in the infrastructure team at Suffolk County Council, and we talk about infrastructure, whether it be education, libraries, waste. If they are wanting to access money from a SIL point of view, it's not ring-fenced to libraries. They have to make a bid, and it has to be about what that infrastructure will deliver and how that stacks up against planning application consultations that were submitted, and indeed what it will deliver for the infrastructure of the area. So it's not a given that that money will necessarily be required for libraries. It may well be. In this particular case, obviously the infrastructure that we're considering at the moment is for education. It's a priority in the infrastructure delivery plan. If we get oversubscribed with bids coming forward, then difficult decisions would have to be made, and we would look to our infrastructure priorities and our council strategies to inform what may be most important in the scheme of things. So far, there are no discussions taking place about library school improvements at all. We've only had one library provision or one library SIL bid made, which came forward by Thurston Parish Council. That was not with Suffolk County Council on board, and it was about portable equipment, which the scheme doesn't lend itself to, so that bid was not taken forward.
Just to supplement that on libraries, the Library Services and Industrial and Providence Society set up some years ago by the County Council. SIL would only be able to fund physical infrastructure, so the extent to which volunteers are staffing libraries across the county or anything like that is kind of on the side of any decision making that you'd need to make about SIL, because broadly speaking that would be about the building itself, or perhaps it's car parking or something along those lines, rather than the actual staffing of the library service itself.
Just one last one, Madam Chairman, if I might. Really, I think this is probably directed at Tom. The Cedars Park area, that I believe was a strategic site in the first place. I was just wondering if it was, how we're getting SIL now.
Cedars Park was a strategic site, but it was delivered as a strategic site prior to SIL having been adopted. So SIL was adopted in April 2016, and Cedars Park was largely kind of 95% built out at that stage. So it was the strategic sites that were identified within the Stowmarket Area Action Plan that were zero rated for SIL. So, for example, Ashes Farm, Union Road, and then a couple of others that were zero rated for SIL purposes. So as development comes forward on Cedars Park now, if there's a little bit of infill within one of the areas, some of the very, very later phases that are coming forward are SILable, because the bits of Cedars Park that are left are not strategic in nature, if that makes sense. So when it was first put forward for planning, it was a strategic site, but at that time the council didn't have an adopted SIL regime. when the council came to adopt its SIL regime, Cedars Park was already built out, so it wasn't included as one of the strategic sites that was zero rated at that time. Sorry if that was a slightly long-winded way of saying it.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Whelan.
Thank you, Chair. The question and the answer about the libraries makes me want to ask another question about libraries. If in 10 years' time, say, there's been no call on the money that's been taken into SIL at the request of Suffolk County Council, in our committee reports we see that so many new houses gives rise to so much need in terms of cash for libraries. If nothing is provided, does any SIL money get lost? I guess not. I'd just like some reassurance on that. And then the mention of Ashes Farm makes me want to ask about, because that's possibly going to, you shouldn't have done that, makes me wonder whether that's going to contribute towards Stow Upland High School, since quite clearly, at some point, not now, but at some point, would that, because there'd be presumably Section 106 on Ashes Farm rather than SIL. I may have got this completely wrong, but if I could just have some sort of explanation, because just as most of the youngsters on Cedars Park walk or cycle to, or drive their car to Stow Upland High School, I guess the people from Ashes Farm will as well.
So, through you, Chair, I'll answer this. So, to take your second point first, Ashes Farm, that will be through a Section 106, in all likelihood, provided that it all depends on how sites move forward within the joint local plan, because obviously we've got the strategic sites were identified in prior documents, but in essence, if Ashes Farm comes forward as a strategic site, then it would be a Section 106, and then money would be secured for school places and probably wouldn't be identified exactly where that would be spent. So the money would be secured, and that would be X amount per student who's coming forward. On the library issue, SIL is collected based on square metre charge and can be spent on any within a list of different types of community infrastructure. So albeit the County Council make representations on their planning application responses, that doesn't determine the amount of SIL that is collected. They are essentially seeking to put a marker down in the sand that they're going to come forward at some point and ask in the future. But we collect the amount of SIL that we collect, regardless of whether those requests are made or not. And those requests, like I say, they're a marker in the sand, but members can spend SIL monies on what they see as the priorities to spend SIL monies on. So the fact that the County Council may have, across a range of different planning applications, asked for circa £200,000 towards libraries doesn't mean that they will get circa £200,000 towards libraries. It means that SIL has been collected, and at some point a bid will come forward for an appropriate funding towards a library given local circumstances or extra demand or whatever. So that link that used to exist between consultation requests and Section 106 negotiation doesn't exist with community infrastructure levy.
If you don't mind, I'd like to ask a question, not so much about SIL, but about libraries, as we're on that subject. In Debenham, for instance, the library moved out of its own building and into a classroom in the school, thereby using up a school classroom. So presumably at some point they will be applying for SIL to fund another classroom. Is that how it would normally work?
It's not as clear cut as that. So the library moved from somewhere within Debenham into the school. So yes, it has taken up space within the school, but whether that would have been an acceptable location for library provision or not, I don't know. But they would be able to come forward for additional school places in due course if they have space to expand at the primary school there, which I think is pretty limited in terms of its ability to actually to grow on the site that it's already located on. So we just have to see as an application came forward.
I have a proposer and a seconder. Any more questions? No? Can I have a show of hands in favour? Thank you. Unanimous. Item 12, MCA 19/35, Regulatory Reform Order, Disabled Adaptations. This is a decision taken by the Chief Executive during the pre-election period. Councillor Flatman.
Thank you, Chair. I have a little bit of background information for you on this. So if the Chief Executive has made a decision in conjunction with the Chairperson of the Council under their delegated powers whilst the Council was in the pre-election period. The Regulatory Reform Housing Assistance England and Wales Order 2002 PRO gives local authorities the power to develop their own policy to assist their residents to maintain and adapt their homes to ensure that they are safe and suitable for them to live in. The Housing Assistance Policy has been developed to allow Baber and Mid Suffolk District Councils to make best use of their Disabled Facilities Grant DFG funding. This will enable the councils to meet their strategic priorities and work collaboratively with health and social care colleagues to provide better outcomes for the residents. The Housing Assistance Policy, HAP, sets out how Baber and Mid Suffolk District Councils will offer assistance to disabled residents to improve accessibility and suitably of their accommodation. The HAP allows Baber and Mid Suffolk District Councils to meet the aspirations set out in their corporate plan and homes and housing strategies to ensure that everyone has a suitable home and residents are able to live as healthily, safely and independently as possible within sustainable communities, Homes and Housing Strategy 2019. The key objectives of the Housing Assistance Policy are to ensure residents are able to live as healthily, safely and independently as possible, to help prevent hospital care, home or residential home admissions, to facilitate the prompt discharge of residents from hospital, to prevent the need for increased expenditure elsewhere in the Suffolk system, including health and social care. The main changes include increasing the MAGs non-means tested to 7,500, introduction of a 10,000 discretionary DFG to top up the 30,000 mandatory DFG, totalling 40,000, relocation grant of up to 7,500, which is not means tested. The policy has now been implemented and will be carefully monitored to measure the success of introducing additional options to try and reduce the DFG underspend. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody have any questions? Councillor Brewster.
You need a second.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
We didn't need a second because it's already gone through.
Just for noting.
Yes. I have just noticed that the last page, page 102, refers to Baber rather than Mid Suffolk. All in favour?
It's got both.
Oh yes, sorry, my apologies.
It's got both.
My apologies. Proposer and a seconder, all in favour? Thank you. Meeting closed at 11:38. Thank you, everybody.